Somehow I was hoping not to be first in line here, but it seems that fate has decided otherwise. And it's my turn now. So, as you may have noticed, looking at the agenda, there's no title for my presentation. There are also no visuals, so we'll have to engage in some kind of exercise of imagination. But I have a text that I wrote a couple of days ago, and I was trying to force myself to rehearse it, but I couldn't make me do it. So I'll do my best. Huh? Actually came up with a title, and my title, what I was trying to do, speak a little bit about what our foundation is doing, but somehow, in a way, square the circle and tie that to our overarching theme of reimagining philanthropy, as were the instructions. Yeah? But that was fine. Yeah. So I came up with a title that is Questions from the Field of Conflict Transformation. Yeah. Because somehow, like so many here, and that surprised me. Yeah, I mean, in a positive way. Yeah, that we value questions. Yeah, and I do so as well. So let me begin. Our foundation, the Berghof Foundation, was set up by my father more than 50 years ago. At the height of the Cold War, he was, like many in his generation, driven by an urge to do whatever possible to prevent the disaster of another world war from repeating itself. And him being a scientist, he was motivated by the question, can systematic reflection on peace and conflict help humanity to overcome repeated cycles of violent escalation? And more concretely, how could that inform what was then a highly polarized inner German debate on matters of security? So he used part of his inheritance to provide this foundation with an endowment, and until today, that serves us as a solid basis for what we do. So during the first decades, the foundation mainly funded peace research in Germany, contributing significantly to the establishment and mainstreaming of this newly emerging field in Germany. And with the end of the Cold War, there came a time of reorientation, and questions concerning ethnopolitical conflicts in the post-Soviet space and beyond moved to the center of our attention. So at the same time, our work increasingly became practice-oriented, and since our research had always been focused on making a practical difference, that wasn't really a complete paradigm shift. But it was the beginning of a transition that brought a change from being a provider of research grants into an organization that was raising additional funds with a mission to transform conflicts around the world. So what do I mean when I say conflict transformation? I will endeavor a definition from a systemic perspective. In a changing world, conflicts are often the result of failure of established systems to produce satisfying results. Such conflicts are good conflicts in the sense that they are indicators for a need of systems to adapt. But because of systems' inherent resilience to change, they are constricted in their adaptability. And yet, if left unresolved, such good conflicts can escalate and develop their own self-reinforcing, self-perpetuating systemic characteristics. The resulting protracted conflicts, and often violent conflicts, can cause immense human suffering on all sides. Conflict transformation, then, is the effort to structure a space that empowers people in conflict to overcome such bad conflicts and bring out the positive aspects of conflict as a source for meaningful and lasting systems change. Seeing conflicts as systems, does that mean that they can be understood by means of a mapping of their inherent interconnections and dynamics? Such a mapping can indeed be useful as a hypothesis, but if taken as a definite answer, it is no more than a complicated conspiracy theory. Because acknowledging that conflicts are complex systems means essentially that they cannot be understood in terms of cause and effect relations, and that the starting point for any attempt to address them must be one of humility. And this, I believe, applies to any form of philanthropy that seeks systemic change rather than solve problems through charity on the level of events. Fighting fires is important, but it may fail to address the underlying structures and mindsets continuously reproducing what is problematic and dangerous. So if there is no simple answer to the challenge of conflict, then the only way to peace is a collaborative engagement in a difficult and essentially unpredictable process. It should be grounded in analysis and the identification of entry points or points of leverage. But more than that, it must be conceived as adaptive, that is, with an ability to respond to new information and conditions by means of flexibility of methods and formats applied. Because if, as the saying goes, planning replaces chance by error, such an approach of reflected practice will involve failures, but it still harbors an opportunity for learning. Yet, it requires persistence and a willingness to continuously question even our own role. In a process, we learn by acknowledging the value of different perspectives. Each process is carried by a collaboration of the like-minded. It may involve on-the-ground partner organizations or insiders, donors, experts, and many more. Our own role can vary. It includes acting as a facilitator, a researcher, a provider of capacity building measures, as well as that of a broker between local needs and external resources. For at its core, the foundation of any such process hinges on its ability to engage those affected by the conflict. We do not solve other people's conflicts, but we bring people in conflict together and empower them to develop their own solutions. While we aim for processes to be inclusive, the number and type of stakeholders involved can differ depending on opportunities, and it can also change over time. And as important as it is to root our role in civil society, it ultimately depends on government as a lever for change and legitimacy. That is why it's important to be able to address and bridge all political levels. The greatest challenge, though, is the matter of involving those resistant to change. Rather than viewing them as spoilers, they should be seen as people who need to be understood and must be included in any strategy for change. In his book, The Moral Imagination, Lederach highlights the importance of empathy and the ability to respond to the humanity of others, even when they are perceived as adversaries. He sees this as fundamental when it comes to envisioning a creative and ethical solution for conflicts. And I agree, I believe this is the essence of making peace. And the courage and leadership that it requires cannot be overstated. I recall having met someone from Colombia. One of her relatives, I think maybe an uncle, was kidnapped and possibly killed by the FARC, a communist guerrilla movement founded in the 60s. And she told me that her nephew had been part of the negotiations with the group in the Havana process and described the deep fear that he had felt. More recently, I had the chance to listen to a member of the FARC who had also been part of the negotiations. Her story was almost the exact mirror image of the former. And you know, they did not become friends, but they summoned the courage and took the political risks to speak to each other and reached a deal. And we know that this was not the end of the story, but it was an important step. And it takes true leadership. And I cannot help but wonder these days where such leadership is to be found. Providing negotiation support to one party, as we did for the FARC, can be a powerful lever when the timing is right. But the process can also take very different forms. In Iraq and Somalia, we are collaborating with a Berlin-based climate change think tank and partners on the ground to identify local solutions to climate change-related security risks. When climate change increases pressure on natural resources, it can exacerbate inequalities and conflict dynamics. This is our working assumption. And by means of dialogue and awareness-raising activities, we seek to develop concrete recommendations to strengthen local capacities and inform humanitarian assistance. Thus, establishing a nexus between fields that too often work in isolation. This example illustrates how a process-oriented multi-stakeholder approach can contribute to a potentially different ecosystem of philanthropy. More than that, it shows how linking conflict and issue areas of philanthropy can harbor the potential for collaboration. The result could be a kind of philanthropy that sees itself as a supporter of processes and as a resource provider in the broader sense, as well as a broker between various interests and local needs. It would address the lack of accountability of philanthropic support driven by out-of-context agendas. It comes with a price tag, though, as it is often slow, complicated, hard to measure, difficult to scale. It's certainly not a panacea, but when it comes to addressing today's complex challenges and interconnected problems, it holds the promise of bringing about a systems change that is needed and which, if left unaddressed, can give rise to protracted destructive conflicts and immense human suffering. I have started by speaking about how my father set up our foundation, motivated by the question, can systematic reflection on peace and conflict help humanity to overcome repeated cycles of violent escalations. We may have found many answers on the way, but the questions remain just as relevant as they were back then. It is only when we confound the answers with the questions that we lose our integrity, and with that the opportunity to do better. Because philanthropy begins with yourself, but it ends with the other. Such must be a philanthropy that asks questions and supports leaders that take risks to reach across divides for something different and hopefully better. Thanks for listening.